Christmas is for family, Stella. You don't have one worth mentioning. Those words cut through the holiday music playing in our Manhattan office like a blade through wrapping paper. Marcus Thornfield adjusted his Hermes tie, the same way he adjusted everything else in his life, with calculated precision and zero regard for who got crushed in the process. Everyone else has earned their time off. You haven't. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had just closed the Henderson account, a $2.3 million marketing contract that would keep our boutique advertising firm, Pinnacle Creative, profitable through the next quarter. But here I stood, watching my colleagues pack up their designer laptops and discussing their holiday plans while I received my Christmas present, mandatory overtime during the most sacred time of year. Let me take you back to where this all began. 3 months earlier, when I walked into Pinnacle Creative with stars in my eyes and a portfolio thick with awards from smaller firms. The office sat on the 47th floor of a glass tower in Midtown, all exposed brick and industrial lighting that screamed, "We're creative but expensive." Marcus had hired me as senior creative director after seeing my campaign for Westfield Insurance. A project that had increased their client retention by 34% and won 2 industry awards. I thought I was finally home. Stella Rodriguez, they called me in my previous job. The girl who could make brands sing, who understood consumer psychology like reading sheet music. 28 years old, Columbia graduate, 5 years of experience turning failing campaigns into market dominators. My mother had cleaned offices in this same building when I was growing up, working double shifts so I could afford college textbooks. Now her daughter worked where she once scrubbed floors. American dream stuff, right, wrong. Marcus Thornfield was old money disguised as new innovation. His grandfather had started a textile empire, his father had modernized it into real estate, and Marcus had pivoted the family wealth into what he called experiential marketing. Translation: he took daddy's money and convinced Fortune 500 companies that he understood millennial consumers better than anyone else. The truth was, Marcus understood spreadsheets and golf handicaps. Actual creativity made him uncomfortable. From day one, he made it clear that my success threatened his carefully constructed narrative. When I presented the Morrison Electronics campaign, a brilliant piece that repositioned their outdated brand for Gen Z consumers, Marcus spent the entire client meeting taking credit for overseeing the strategic direction, while I sat silently, watching my ideas get repackaged as his vision. Stella executed the concept beautifully, he would say, using that word, executed, like I was some kind of assembly line worker rather than the architect of the entire campaign. The Morrison campaign went on to increase their social media engagement by 340% and drove their highest quarterly sales in company history. Marcus got the industry recognition. I got a mediocre performance review that cited areas for improvement in client relationship management. The office culture at Pinnacle reflected Marcus's personality perfectly. Surface-level progressive. They had a meditation room and kombucha on tap, but underneath, it operated on the same old-school power dynamics that had kept people like my mother cleaning other people's messes. The other senior staff, Brandon Mitchell and Samantha Hayes, came from the same prep school networks as Marcus. They spoke in code, mentioning restaurants I'd never heard of, referencing family vacations to places I couldn't pronounce, dropping names of people who apparently mattered in ways I didn't understand. I worked twice as hard as anyone else in that office. While Brandon spent his afternoons playing ping pong in the collaboration zone, I was analyzing market data and consumer trends. When Samantha took 2-hour lunches at places where appetizers cost more than my mother's weekly grocery budget, I was in the conference room perfecting client presentations. But hard work, I learned, doesn't automatically translate to respect when you're playing by someone else's rules. The breaking point started building in November. The Blackstone Financial account, a massive insurance company looking to rebrand their entire consumer-facing division, came to us through a referral. Marcus assigned me as lead, which should have been a vote of confidence. Instead, it felt like he was setting me up to fail with an impossible timeline and a client known for chewing through creative agencies. I spent 3 weeks crafting a campaign that didn't just meet their needs, it anticipated problems they didn't even know they had. Secure your tomorrow, live your today, became more than a tagline. It was a complete brand philosophy that repositioned Blackstone from a stodgy insurance company to a partner in life's adventures. The presentation included market research, focus group results, social media strategies, traditional advertising concepts, and a comprehensive rollout plan that covered 12 months of implementation. The client meeting was scheduled for December 15th. I arrived an hour early, checking every slide, every graphic, every transition. This was my moment, the campaign that would prove I belonged at this level. that would silence the whispers about whether the girl from Queens could really compete with the Ivy League crowd. Marcus walked in 5 minutes before the client arrived, glanced at my materials, and nodded approvingly. Good work, Stella. I'll take it from here. I sat in stunned silence as he delivered my presentation word for word, presenting my research as his insights, my creative concepts as his vision. When the client asked specific questions about consumer psychology data I had spent weeks compiling, Marcus smoothly deflected, "My team did excellent background work on that. Stella, why don't you pull up those numbers for Mr. Blackstone?" Team? As if I hadn't been working alone in my office until midnight for 3 straight weeks. The client loved everything. They signed immediately, a $4.2 million contract, the largest in Pinnacle's history. Marcus accepted their congratulations with the grace of someone who genuinely believed he deserved the credit. At Pinnacle, we pride ourselves on understanding what tomorrow's consumers want today, he said, recycling my exact words from the presentation strategy one had outlined in my notes. That afternoon, he called an all-hands meeting to announce the Blackstone victory. "This is why we invest in senior leadership," he told the assembled staff. "When you have the right strategic vision at the top, everything else falls into place." The applause felt like mockery. Brandon and Samantha smiled at me with the kind of pity you reserve for naive children who still believe in fairness. The next week brought the holiday party planning. December in Manhattan meant clients expected elegance, and Marcus spared no expense. He rented the rooftop at the Standard, hired a jazz quartet, and arranged for premium open bar service. The invitation list read like a who's who of New York advertising, industry legends, client executives, media buyers with million-dollar budgets. Everyone was invited. Everyone except the person who had just delivered the company's biggest win of the year. "Someone needs to manage the Peterson project while we're networking," Marcus explained, referencing a small retail chain campaign that could easily wait until after New Year's. "Besides, these events are really more for client-facing leadership. You understand." I understood perfectly. They needed me to work so they could party off my success. December 23rd arrived gray and bitter, the kind of New York winter day that makes you question why humans ever decided to build a city here. The office was practically empty, just security, a few unfortunate souls from accounting, and me. Everyone else had started their holidays early, posting Instagram stories from ski lodges in Aspen and beaches in the Caribbean. I sat in my office, surrounded by Peterson campaign materials that could have been handled by any junior associate, watching the snow begin to fall against the floor-to-ceiling windows. 47 floors below, the city was transforming into a holiday wonderland. Families hurried along the sidewalks carrying wrapped packages. Children pressed their faces against storefront windows displaying mechanical Christmas villages. The whole world was celebrating, and I was trapped in a glass tower, working on someone else's dream. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Mija, what time will you be here tomorrow? Your Aunt Rosa is making tamales, and your cousin Miguel is driving up from Philadelphia with his kids. We haven't seen you since Thanksgiving." I stared at the message for a long time before typing back, "Can't make it this year, Mom. Work emergency. I'll try to stop by on the 26th. The lie tasted bitter. There was no emergency. There was only Marcus Thornfield's carefully constructed reminder of where I stood in his hierarchy. As if summoned by my thoughts, Marcus appeared in my doorway. He wore a charcoal wool coat that probably cost more than most people's rent, and his usual expression of mild annoyance that he tried to pass off as busy importance. "How's the Peterson work coming along?" he asked, though we both knew he didn't care about the answer. "Nearly finished," I replied. "Should have the final concepts ready for review after the holiday." "Good. I appreciate you handling this, Stella. Someone has to keep the lights on while the rest of us recharge for Q1. He paused, checking his Patek Philippe watch. "I'm heading to the Hamptons tonight. The Blackstone executives have a house out there, thought it would be good to solidify that relationship in a more relaxed setting." The Blackstone executives. The ones I had spent weeks researching, understanding, crafting messages that would resonate with their specific business challenges. They were bonding with Marcus over cocktails and ocean views while I sat alone in an empty office, working on projects that didn't matter. "Enjoy the time off," I managed to say. Marcus smiled, the kind of smile that never quite reached his eyes. "You know, Stella, dedication like yours is rare in this business. People notice when someone is willing to go the extra mile." He adjusted his coat collar. "Christmas is for family, Stella. You don't have one worth mentioning. Everyone else has earned their time off. You haven't." The words hit me like a physical blow. Not just the casual cruelty of dismissing my family, but the deliberate message underneath: "You are not one of us, you never will be one of us, and we will remind you of that whenever it serves our purposes." He left without another word, his expensive shoes clicking against the polished concrete floors until the elevator doors closed behind him. I sat frozen in my chair, staring at the space where he had stood, replaying his words over and over. You don't have one worth mentioning. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off, my mother, who had worked 3 jobs to pay for my college applications. My Aunt Rosa, who taught me that respect is earned through character, not inheritance. My cousin Miguel, who served 2 tours in Afghanistan and came home to build a small but successful construction company with his own hands. My grandmother, who had crossed a border with nothing but hope and raised a family that now included teachers, nurses, small business owners, and yes, one advertising executive who apparently wasn't grateful enough for the privilege of being exploited. The silence in the office was complete now. Even the security guard had disappeared to wherever security guards go during the lonely hours between Christmas Eve and Christmas morning. I walked to the window and looked out at the city spreading endlessly below me. Somewhere down there, Marcus was probably settling into his car service, already mentally at his Hamptons retreat. Somewhere else, Brandon and Samantha were at holiday parties, networking and laughing and building the relationships that would carry them through another year of unearned success, and here I was, 47 floors above my mother's old cleaning route, finally understanding that talent and hard work were necessary but not sufficient. In Marcus Thornfield's world, I would always be the girl who executed other people's visions, who worked holidays while others celebrated, who should be grateful for the opportunity to prove my dedication by sacrificing everything that actually mattered. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the photos from last Christmas, my family crowded around our small dining table, laughing at my uncle's terrible jokes, my mother's face glowing with pride as she introduced me to neighbors as my daughter, the executive. Simple people, Marcus would probably call them. People not worth mentioning, but they were my people. And for the first time since I had started at Pinnacle Creative, I wondered if maybe Marcus was right about one thing. Maybe I hadn't earned my time off yet. Maybe I had been working for the wrong things, measuring success by the wrong metrics, seeking approval from people whose respect wasn't worth having. I closed the Peterson files and turned off my computer. The campaign could wait. Everything could wait. Because somewhere in the intersection of Marcus's casual cruelty and my own delayed recognition of what actually mattered, something had shifted. Something that would make the next week very interesting. For everyone involved, the elevator descended through 47 floors of someone else's empire, carrying me away from the place where I had learned the hardest lesson of my career. Sometimes the most important thing you can discover about yourself is exactly how much you're willing to accept. And what happens when you finally decide you've had enough. Christmas morning found me in my studio apartment in Astoria, staring at a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. The silence was different here than it had been in the Pinnacle office, warmer somehow, filled with possibility instead of isolation. My laptop sat open on the small dining table I'd inherited from my grandmother, its screen displaying something I hadn't looked at in months, my personal portfolio. The work stared back at me, campaigns I'd created before Pinnacle, before Marcus. Before I'd learned to package my ideas in someone else's vision. The Westfield insurance campaign that had originally caught Marcus's attention. The pro bono work I'd done for a local community center that had tripled their volunteer registration. A small restaurant chain rebrand that had helped them expand from 3 locations to 15. All of it mine. All of it bearing my name, my signature, my creative DNA. My phone buzzed against the table. A text from my mother. We missed you yesterday, Mija. Rosa saved you a plate. Come by when you can. I closed the laptop and grabbed my keys. The drive to my mother's house in Elmhurst took 45 minutes, winding through neighborhoods that told the real story of New York, not the Manhattan glass towers and expense account lunches, but the bodegas and laundromats and families making it work with whatever they had. My mother's house sat on a tree-lined street where kids still played stickball and neighbors actually knew each other's names. She opened the door before I could knock, the way she always did, as if she had some maternal radar that detected my presence 3 blocks away. Carmen Rodriguez was barely 5 feet tall, but her hugs had the power to realign your entire perspective on what mattered in life. You look tired, Stella, she said, steering me toward the kitchen where the scent of leftover tamales and café con leche promised comfort. And thin. Are you eating? I'm fine, Mom. The lie came automatically, a reflex developed over years of not wanting to worry her. But sitting at the same Formica table where I'd done homework 20 years earlier, surrounded by family photos, and the gentle chaos of a house that had raised 3 kids on a secretary's salary, I realized how untrue that was. I wasn't fine. I was successful by every metric I'd been taught to value: good salary, prestigious job, corner office with a view, but I felt emptier than I had when I was waiting tables between internships, dreaming of the day I'd make it in advertising. Tell me about work, she said, settling across from me with her own coffee. You've been so busy lately. It must be exciting, all those important accounts. How do you explain to someone who cleaned offices for 30 years so you could have opportunities she never dreamed of, that those opportunities had turned into elegant forms of exploitation? How do you tell your mother that her daughter's boss had dismissed her family as not worth mentioning while she sat 20 miles away, proud of her executive daughter? It's challenging, I said instead. I'm learning a lot. She studied my face with the intensity of someone who had raised children mostly alone, who had developed the ability to read between lines and hear what wasn't being said. Learning what, exactly? The question hung in the warm kitchen air, competing with the distant sound of my cousin's kids playing in the living room. Learning what, exactly? Learning that talent without connections was like having a Ferrari without fuel. Learning that working twice as hard got you half as far when you didn't have the right last name. Learning that some people viewed your success as a threat to the natural order of things. Learning who I want to become, I said finally. It was the most honest thing I'd said in months. My mother reached across the table and took my hand. You know, when I was cleaning those office buildings downtown, I used to imagine my daughter sitting in one of those big chairs, making important decisions. I'm proud that it happened. But I'm proud of who you are when you're sitting right here. I stayed for 3 hours, playing with my cousin's kids, listening to my uncle's stories about his latest construction projects, absorbing the kind of love that doesn't come with performance reviews or billable hour requirements. When I finally left, my mother pressed a container of leftover tamales into my hands and kissed my forehead the same way she had when I was 5 years old. Whatever you're thinking about, Mija, she said, remember that Rodriguez women don't give up. We just get smarter. The drive back to Astoria gave me time to think about what getting smarter might look like. I pulled into a 24-hour diner near my apartment, the kind of place where the coffee was strong, the pie was decent, and nobody cared if you sat in a booth for hours with just a laptop and a legal pad. I ordered coffee and opened a fresh notebook. The kind with lined pages that felt substantial under a pen. At the top of the first page, I wrote, what if? What if I stopped trying to fit into Marcus Thornfield's version of success? What if I remembered why I'd fallen in love with advertising in the first place, not the prestige or the salary, but the pure creative challenge of understanding what people needed and finding ways to connect them with it? What if I started building something that belonged completely to me? The idea started small, the way all dangerous ideas do. A freelance consulting practice, maybe. Something I could build slowly while keeping my day job, testing the waters without burning bridges. I knew the industry, had relationships with vendors and freelancers, understood client needs better than most people twice my age, but as I sketched out possibilities on the lined paper, the idea grew teeth. Why think small? Why settle for consulting when I could create something revolutionary? The advertising industry was ripe for disruption. Too many agencies were stuck in old models, charging premium prices for mediocre creativity while actual talent got exploited by people like Marcus. What if there was a better way? I started researching, using the diner's Wi-Fi to dig into industry trends, startup success stories, funding models for creative agencies. The more I learned, the more excited I became. Small creative shops were outperforming established agencies by focusing on authentic storytelling and genuine client relationships instead of golf course networking and inherited connections. By the time the sun came up, I had filled 17 pages with notes, contact information, potential business models, and something that looked suspiciously like a revolution disguised as a business plan. The next few days blurred together in a haze of research and planning. I took vacation days I'd been saving for a trip that never materialized, telling Marcus I needed time to recharge for Q1. He approved it with the distracted air of someone who didn't particularly care what his employees did as long as they were available when needed. I spent those days in coffee shops across Queens and Brooklyn, away from Manhattan's advertising corridor, talking to small business owners who needed marketing help but couldn't afford Pinnacle's minimum fees. I met with Sophia Chen, who ran a small chain of authentic dim sum restaurants and was struggling to compete with trendy fusion places that served inferior food but had better Instagram presence. I talked to David Okafor, whose family's shipping company was losing contracts to larger firms despite providing better service, simply because they didn't know how to tell their story effectively. Every conversation confirmed what I was beginning to understand. There was a massive gap in the market between high-end agencies that charged Fortune 500 prices and cheap online services that delivered generic results. Small businesses needed sophisticated marketing strategy, but they needed it delivered by people who understood their reality, their budgets, their dreams. They needed someone who remembered what it felt like to watch your mother count tips at The kitchen table, who understood that every dollar spent on marketing was a dollar not spent on rent or payroll or keeping the lights on. I started sketching out a different kind of agency. One that charged fair prices for exceptional work. One that measured success by client results, not industry awards. One that hired talent based on ability rather than pedigree, that valued creativity over connections, that treated small business owners with the same respect typically reserved for Fortune 500 CEOs. The more I planned, the more I realized I wasn't just designing a business, I was designing my own liberation. By New Year's Eve, I had a name, Catalyst Creative. I had a business plan, a target client profile, and a growing list of potential projects. More importantly, I had something I hadn't felt in months, excitement about going to work. I spent New Year's Eve alone in my apartment, not because I didn't have invitations, but because I wanted to be alone with the idea that was taking shape. At midnight, while fireworks exploded over the East River and my neighbors celebrated another year of whatever they were doing with their lives, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to build something beautiful. Something that belonged to me. Something that would prove talent and integrity could compete with privilege and connections. Something that would make Marcus Thornfield very, very sorry he'd ever underestimated the girl from Queens whose family wasn't worth mentioning. The first step was the hardest. I opened a business bank account. $500 from my savings. Everything I could spare after rent and student loans. It wasn't much, but it was mine. The bank teller, a young woman about my age, stamped the deposit slip with the kind of efficiency that suggested she processed dozens of small business dreams every day. "Good luck," she said, handing me the receipt. "Starting something new?" "Something like that," I replied, folding the paper carefully and putting it in my wallet next to a photo of my family from last Christmas. The Christmas I'd missed because I was too busy being grateful for the opportunity to be exploited. That night, I started building my website. Nothing fancy, I couldn't afford a designer, and besides, I wanted every element to be authentic to my vision. Clean lines, bold colors, and copy that spoke directly to small business owners who were tired of being treated like second-class clients by agencies that didn't understand their world. "Your story matters," I wrote on the homepage. "Your business deserves marketing that understands where you came from and where you're going. At Catalyst Creative, we don't just create campaigns, we create connections." It was a direct challenge to everything Pinnacle represented, though I was careful not to name names or burn bridges explicitly. Not yet. January 2nd, I had my first inquiry. Sophia Chen had found my website through a Google search and wanted to know if I could help her restaurants tell their story better. She had a budget of $3,000, which would have gotten her laughed out of most Manhattan agencies. At Pinnacle, Marcus wouldn't have taken her call. I scheduled our meeting for that Saturday, at her flagship restaurant in Flushing. We sat in a corner booth while her staff prepped for the lunch rush, and she told me about her grandmother's recipes, her father's immigration story, her own dreams of building something that honored the past while embracing the future. "The fusion places," she said, "they make money because they tell a story people want to hear. But it's not our story. It's not real. How do we compete with fake when we're committed to authenticity?" It was exactly the kind of challenge I'd been craving at Pinnacle but never got to solve. Instead of presentations about market penetration and demographic targeting, Sophia needed something much more fundamental. She needed someone to help her translate love into language that customers would understand and choose. I spent the next week developing a strategy that would cost Sophia $3,000 and would have cost $50,000 at Pinnacle. Social media campaigns that showcased her grandmother's hands making dumplings. A loyalty program called Family Table that treated regular customers like actual family. Community partnerships with local cultural organizations that reinforced her restaurant's role as authentic gathering places. When I presented the plan to Sophia the following Saturday, she cried. Not because it was complicated or expensive, but because someone had finally seen her business the way she saw it, as an expression of love worth celebrating. "When can we start?" she asked. "Immediately," I said. "But I should mention, I'm still working at another agency during the week. Catalyst Creative is my evening and weekend project for now." She laughed. "The best things always start as side projects. My father ran his shipping business out of our garage for 3 years before he could afford a real office." That night, I signed my first contract as Catalyst Creative. $3,000 for 6 months of marketing strategy and implementation. It was a fraction of what I made in a month at Pinnacle, but it felt like winning the lottery. More importantly, it felt like proof of concept. If I could deliver exceptional results for Sophia Chen's $3,000 budget, imagine what I could do when I had real resources, a full team, and complete creative freedom. I was building something dangerous, an alternative that worked better than the original. And I was building it quietly, carefully, in the shadows of Marcus Thornfield's empire, using skills he had taught me to undervalue and connections he didn't know I was making. January 3rd marked my return to Pinnacle Creative after the holiday break. I walked into the office with the same laptop bag, the same Metro card, the same appearance of resigned compliance I'd cultivated over months of careful observation. But everything else had changed. I had a secret now. A beautiful, growing secret that was teaching me the difference between working for someone else's dream and building my own. Marcus welcomed everyone back with his usual performance of busy importance, discussing Q1 goals and client development strategies with the casual authority of someone who had never doubted his right to lead. He assigned me to the Peterson campaign follow-up and mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that the Blackstone executives had been very impressed with our holiday hospitality in the Hamptons. I smiled and nodded and took notes, playing the role I had mastered, the grateful employee who understood her place in the hierarchy. But inside, something was counting down, because while Marcus had been networking in the Hamptons and collecting credit for work he hadn't done, I had been learning something much more valuable: how to build something that belonged completely to me, and that knowledge was about to become very expensive for everyone who had underestimated the girl from Queens whose family wasn't worth mentioning. February brought the kind of New York cold that makes you question every life choice that led you to live somewhere the air hurts your face. But inside Sophia Chen's flagship restaurant, warmth radiated from more than just the steaming dim sum baskets. The lunch rush was unlike anything she'd seen in 2 years, a steady stream of customers who weren't just eating, but engaging with her story in ways that transformed transactions into connections. The Family Table loyalty program I designed for her had launched 3 weeks earlier with modest expectations. Instead of the typical corporate rewards system that treated customers like walking credit cards, we'd created something revolutionary, a program that made people feel like they belonged somewhere. Regular customers received handwritten notes from Sophia thanking them for specific orders. Birthday celebrations included a complimentary meal and a Polaroid photo added to the family wall. Longtime patrons could bring friends for grandmother's price, the same rate Sophia's grandmother had charged when she first opened a dumpling cart in Flushing 40 years ago. "Look at this," Sophia said, showing me her reservation book. Every page was filled, with a waiting list that stretched 2 weeks out. But it's not just the numbers. Listen to how they talk now. She was right. The conversation in the dining room had changed. Instead of the hushed efficiency of people eating quickly and leaving, customers lingered. They asked questions about ingredients, shared stories about their own family recipes, brought their children to try authentic Chinese food for the first time. The restaurant had transformed from a place you went to eat into a place you went to experience something real. The social media campaign had exceeded every metric we'd set. The video of Sophia's 80-year-old mother demonstrating dumpling folding techniques had been shared over 15,000 times, generating coverage in 3 local food blogs and a feature in Time Out New York. But more importantly, it had inspired 12 other family-owned restaurants to reach out to Catalyst Creative, asking if we could help them tell their stories too. I was learning something Marcus Thornfield had never understood: authentic stories don't just sell products. They create movements. David Okafor's shipping company was teaching me the same lesson from a different angle. When I'd first met him at a small business networking event in Brooklyn, his family's logistics firm was hemorrhaging contracts to larger competitors despite providing superior service. The problem wasn't their capabilities, it was their invisibility. "We're the best at what we do," David had explained over coffee near his warehouse in Red Hook. 23 years in business, never lost a shipment, never missed a deadline. But when corporate clients choose shipping partners, they don't see us. We don't exist in their world. The challenge was fascinating: how do you make a family shipping business compete with multinational corporations that have marketing budgets larger than most small companies' annual revenue? The answer, I realized, wasn't to make Okafor Logistics look like a big corporation. It was to make being small look like an advantage. We repositioned the company around something their larger competitors couldn't offer: personal accountability. Every client worked directly with a member of the Okafor family. Every shipment was tracked not just by computers, but by people who knew the client's business personally. When problems arose, and in shipping, problems always arise, they were solved by decision makers, not customer service representatives reading from scripts. "Your package, our promise," became more than a tagline. It became a business philosophy that attracted clients who were tired of being account numbers in massive corporate systems. Within 6 weeks, David had signed 4 new contracts, including one with a boutique fashion company that had left their previous logistics provider specifically because they wanted to work with real people who care about our business. The success stories were adding up, but I was learning to manage them carefully. During the day, I maintained my performance at Pinnacle Creative with the precision of someone walking a tightrope. I arrived on time, met my deadlines, participated in Marcus's meetings with appropriate levels of deference. I gave him no reason to question my loyalty or examine my evening activities too closely, but those evening activities were becoming increasingly difficult to hide. Catalyst Creative was outgrowing my studio apartment. Client meetings in my living room had been charming when I had 2 clients, with 7 active accounts and a waiting list of potential projects. It was becoming unprofessional. I needed real office space, but Manhattan rents were impossible on my current resources. The solution came from an unexpected source, my uncle Roberto, who owned a small auto repair shop in Long Island City. He had unused space above the garage, 2 rooms with good light and a separate entrance, that he'd been planning to convert into an apartment for rental income. "Family doesn't charge family rent," he said when I explained my situation. "But you fix up the space yourself, and you let my customers park in your spots when they need overnight work done." It was perfect. The neighborhood was rapidly gentrifying, attracting exactly the kind of small businesses and creative entrepreneurs who needed marketing help but couldn't afford Madison Avenue agencies. The space had character: exposed brick walls, large windows, hardwood floors that creaked with authenticity. Most importantly, it was mined out. I spent 2 weekends in March transforming the empty rooms into Catalyst Creative's first real headquarters. My cousin Miguel helped with electrical work, Sophia donated furniture from her restaurant renovation, and David's shipping connections got me discounted rates on office supplies. By the end of the month, I had a conference room, a workspace for 3 people, and a kitchen area where clients could feel comfortable spending time developing their stories. The official opening was intentionally low-key, a small gathering of current clients, their families, and the network of small business owners who were beginning to talk about the marketing consultant in Queens who understood their world. No industry professionals, no media coverage, no attempt to announce Catalyst Creative's existence to Manhattan's advertising establishment, not yet, but word was spreading organically in ways that traditional marketing could never achieve. Maria Santos, who owned a small bakery in Jackson Heights, had heard about Sophia's success from her sister-in-law. James Morrison, whose family hardware store was struggling to compete with big-box retailers, got my contact information from David Okafor during a chance conversation at their kids' soccer game. Each new client brought unique challenges that forced me to develop skills Marcus had never allowed me to use at Pinnacle. Maria needed help repositioning her bakery as a custom cake destination for quinceañeras and weddings, competing against chain stores by emphasizing her ability to create edible art that reflected each family's cultural traditions. James needed a strategy that highlighted his store's role as a community resource, the place where neighbors came not just for hardware, but for advice, conversation, and connections that box stores couldn't provide. Every project required deep research into cultural nuances, community dynamics, and customer psychology that went far beyond traditional demographic analysis. I was learning to think like an anthropologist rather than just a marketer, understanding that effective advertising meant understanding the full context of people's lives. The results spoke for themselves. Maria's cake orders increased by 240% after we launched a social media campaign showcasing her work on real quinceañeras, complete with testimonials from grateful families and time-lapse videos of her artistic process. James's hardware store became a case study in community-centered retail, attracting customers who drove past 3 Home Depots to shop somewhere they felt valued and understood. But the most significant breakthrough came from an unexpected source. In April, I received a call from Jennifer Walsh, marketing director for Brooklyn Community Bank, a local institution that had been struggling to compete with national banks that offered higher interest rates and more convenient locations. She'd heard about Catalyst Creative through Maria Santos, whose bakery loan had been approved by Brooklyn Community after being rejected by 3 larger banks. "We need help," Jennifer said during our initial meeting in the bank's Park Slope headquarters. "We're not trying to be Chase or Bank of America. We're trying to be something better, a bank that actually knows its customers, that invests in local communities, that makes decisions based on relationships rather than algorithms. But we don't know how to communicate that in a way that competes with their marketing budgets." This was different from my other clients. Brooklyn Community Bank wasn't a family business or a small restaurant. It was a legitimate financial institution with multiple locations, regulatory requirements, and a board of directors. If I could develop a successful campaign for them, it would establish Catalyst Creative as a serious agency capable of handling sophisticated clients. The challenge was complex. How do you make community banking feel like an advantage rather than a limitation? How do you compete with institutions that can offer better rates and more services by emphasizing intangible benefits like personal relationships and local investment? The answer came from researching the bank's actual customer stories. I spent 2 weeks interviewing clients who had chosen Brooklyn Community over larger alternatives, trying to understand what had influenced their decisions. The patterns that emerged were fascinating. Maria Santos had chosen them because the loan officer had visited her bakery, tasted her pastries, and understood her business model before approving her expansion loan. David Okafor banked there because, when his shipping software had been hacked, the bank's fraud prevention team had called him personally within minutes, helping him protect his accounts rather than just freezing them and making him call customer service. The campaign practically wrote itself, banking that knows your name. Instead of competing on rates or convenience, we positioned Brooklyn Community as the bank that treated customers like neighbors rather than account numbers. The television spots featured real customers telling real stories about moments when their bank had acted like a partner rather than just a vendor. The launch exceeded everyone's expectations. New account openings increased by 67% in the first month, but more importantly, customer satisfaction scores reached record levels as existing clients felt their choice to bank locally was being validated and celebrated. Jennifer Walsh was thrilled. But she was also curious. "Where did you learn to think like this?" she asked after reviewing the campaign results. "Your approach is completely different from the other agencies we considered." I could have told her about my Columbia degree, my previous experience, my industry awards. Instead, I found myself talking about my mother's work cleaning office buildings, about growing up in a community where everybody knew everybody, about learning that the most powerful marketing tool was authentic human connection. "The best ideas come from understanding real people's real lives," I said. "Most agencies create campaigns from boardrooms in Manhattan. I create them from kitchens in Queens." That conversation led to something unexpected. Brooklyn Community Bank wanted to put Catalyst Creative on retainer, guaranteeing steady income and giving me the financial stability to expand my team. It was the kind of breakthrough that could transform my evening project into a legitimate business, but it also created a problem I hadn't anticipated. Success was becoming harder to hide. The bank campaign required daytime meetings, client calls during business hours, and a level of professional visibility that couldn't be confined to evenings and weekends. I was running out of vacation days and personal time, using lunch breaks for conference calls and staying up until 2 a.m. to finish pinnacle projects while managing Catalyst Creative's growing demands. Something had to give. The question was whether I was ready to make the choice that had been building since that Christmas Eve when Marcus had dismissed my family as not worth mentioning. May brought a decision point I couldn't avoid. Sophia Chen's success had attracted attention from the New York Restaurant Association, who wanted to feature her story in their quarterly magazine and potentially use her campaign as a case study for other family-owned establishments. It was exactly the kind of recognition that could transform Catalyst Creative from a local secret into an industry player, but it would also mean going public in a way that would inevitably reach Marcus and the Manhattan advertising establishment. That had never heard of the girl from Queens who was quietly building an alternative to their world. I sat in my new office above my uncle's garage, looking out at the Manhattan skyline across the East River, and realized that hiding was no longer an option. Catalyst Creative had become too successful, too visible, too important to remain a secret. It was time to step into the light and see what happened when talent without connections decided to compete openly with privilege and pedigree. The war was about to begin. And I had spent 5 months building weapons Marcus Thornfield had never seen coming. The New York Restaurant Association feature hit newsstands on a humid Thursday morning in June, and by noon, my phone was ringing every 10 minutes. The 3-page spread showcased Sophia's transformation with before and after photos that told the story better than any marketing textbook. Empty dining rooms becoming community gathering spaces, generic social media feeds becoming vibrant storytelling platforms, and a small family business growing into a neighborhood institution. But it wasn't just Sophia's success that caught industry attention. The article prominently credited Catalyst Creative, a boutique agency specializing in authentic brand storytelling for community-focused businesses. My name appeared in print 4 times. My photo ran alongside Sophia's in the sidebar featuring rising stars in restaurant marketing. I was officially visible. The first call came from Antonio Ricci, whose family had been running an Italian market in Little Italy for 3 generations but was losing customers to trendy gastropubs that served authentic pasta at triple the price. The second came from Patricia Kim, who wanted help promoting her mother's Korean spa in Flushing, competing against luxury wellness centers that charged Manhattan prices for services her family had been perfecting for 30 years. By Friday afternoon, I had received inquiries from 17 potential clients, 3 job offers from established agencies, and 1 very interesting phone call from a reporter at Crane's New York Business who was writing a piece about emerging talent in NYC's marketing scene. But the most significant call came on Saturday morning while I was reviewing proposals in my office above Uncle Roberto's garage. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but the voice was unmistakably familiar. Stella? This is Brandon Mitchell from Pinnacle Creative. I hope you don't mind that I tracked down your number, but I saw the Restaurant Association piece, and I have to say, I'm impressed. Really impressive work. Brandon. Marcus's prep school buddy who spent more time networking than working, who had never spoken to me directly unless he needed something. Now he was calling my personal number on a Saturday morning, his voice carrying the kind of forced casual interest that meant something important was happening behind the scenes. Thanks, Brandon. That's very kind of you to say. Listen, I don't know if you're taking on new projects, but I have a situation that might be perfect for your unique approach. Could we grab coffee sometime this week? I'd rather discuss it in person. I agreed to meet him Tuesday morning at a cafe in Midtown, far enough from Pinnacle's office to maintain plausible deniability but close enough to suggest this wasn't entirely personal. The game was changing, and Brandon Mitchell had just moved. The first piece, the weekend gave me time to research what I suspected was coming. A few strategic Google searches and LinkedIn investigations revealed that Pinnacle had lost two significant clients in the past month, Morrison Electronics, whose account I had originally won, and Westfield Insurance, the company whose campaign had first brought me to Marcus's attention. Both companies had cited creative differences and evolving strategic needs in their departure announcements. Translation: they weren't getting the innovation and attention they expected from an agency that charged premium prices for delegated execution. Meanwhile, Marcus had been aggressively pursuing larger corporate accounts, trying to position Pinnacle as a player in the same league as Manhattan's established agencies. The strategy made sense from his perspective. Bigger clients meant bigger fees, more prestige, validation of his vision for building a creative empire worthy of the Thornfield name, but Marcus had forgotten something crucial: he'd built his agency's reputation on work I had created. Without me generating innovative campaigns, Pinnacle was just another well-connected shop charging Fortune 500 prices for safe, predictable creative that looked impressive in boardrooms but failed to move markets. Tuesday morning arrived gray and humid, with the kind of weather that makes New York feel like a sauna disguised as a city. I chose my outfit carefully, professional but not corporate, successful but not threatening. The goal was to project confidence without revealing how much I was enjoying this unexpected development. Brandon was already waiting when I arrived, occupying a corner table with the territorial precision of someone who understood that in Manhattan, good seating was a form of power. He looked exactly like he always did, expensively casual, genetically blonde, radiating the kind of effortless privilege that comes from never having to worry about student loans or subway delays. Stella, you look great. Really great. Thanks for making time for this. He stood to hug me, a gesture that felt calculated to establish familiarity and warmth. I ordered you a cappuccino. I remembered you mentioning you preferred them to regular coffee. I had never mentioned any such preference to Brandon, but I smiled and let him believe he was demonstrating thoughtful attention to detail rather than generic assumptions about what sophisticated people drink. So, he said, settling back into his chair with the air of someone preparing to make an offer I couldn't refuse, I'll cut straight to the point. We're expanding our small business division at Pinnacle, and we need someone who really understands that market. Someone with proven experience working with community-focused clients. The irony was delicious. Marcus Thornfield's agency, which had built its reputation by stealing credit for my work with major corporations, now wanted to hire me to win back the small business market they had never understood in the first place. That's interesting, I said, keeping my voice neutral. What kind of role are you thinking about? Senior Director of Community Engagement. You'd have your own team, your own budget, complete creative control over small business accounts. We're talking about a significant increase from your current salary, plus equity participation and a signing bonus that would, well, let's just say it would make this transition very comfortable for you. He slid a folder across the table. Inside was a formal offer letter with numbers that made my student loan debt look like pocket change. The salary was double what I made currently. The equity package would vest over 4 years. The signing bonus was more money than I'd ever seen in one place. This is generous, I said, studying the documents. Very generous. But I'm curious, why now? What changed? Brandon's smile flickered for just a moment, revealing something underneath the polished surface. We've been watching your work, obviously. The Restaurant Association piece was just the latest example of what we've been tracking for months. You've developed something really special with this community-focused approach. Tracking for months. So they had known about Catalyst Creative longer than I'd realized. The question was how much they knew and what they planned to do with that information. I appreciate the offer, I said, closing the folder. Can I have some time to think about it? Of course. Take all the time you need. But Stella. He leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice to convey confidential importance. Between us, Marcus is really excited about this direction. He sees huge potential in the community market, and he specifically asked me to approach you about leading this initiative. Marcus was excited. Marcus had specifically requested me. The same Marcus who had forced me to work Christmas while dismissing my family as not worth mentioning, who had stolen credit for my campaigns while treating me like a replaceable execution specialist. Now he wanted me back, offering more money and respect than he'd ever provided when he actually had me. Because my absence had revealed something he couldn't afford to lose, the talent that had been driving his agency's success. I'll definitely give it serious consideration, I told Brandon. This is a big decision. We finished our coffee with small talk about industry trends and mutual acquaintances, but I could see Brandon calculating behind his pleasant expressions. He was trying to determine how desperate I might be for validation, how susceptible to flattery, and how likely to accept his offer based on ego rather than strategy. He had no idea that I was calculating too. That afternoon, I called an emergency meeting with my core clients. Sophia arrived first, bringing dim sum from her restaurant. David came directly from his warehouse, still wearing work boots and carrying the scent of shipping containers. Maria brought samples from her latest cake designs, and Jennifer from Brooklyn Community Bank arrived with financial projections that showed Catalyst Creative's campaigns were exceeding all performance benchmarks. I told them about Brandon's offer, watching their faces as they processed what it might mean for their businesses and the relationships we'd built. So Pinnacle wants to steal you back, Sophia said, her voice carrying the edge that had helped her negotiate with difficult suppliers for 20 years. Because they finally realized what they lost. It's not about stealing, I said carefully. It's about opportunity. Running a small business is challenging, and this offer would provide financial security that Catalyst Creative might take years to achieve. David laughed, the sound filling my small conference room with genuine amusement. Stella, with respect. That's corporate bullshit. You know it, and we know it. The question is whether you're going to let them buy back what they threw away. The conversation continued for 2 hours, but not in the direction I'd expected. Instead of trying to convince me to stay, my clients started strategizing ways to help Catalyst Creative compete more effectively with established agencies. Sophia offered to introduce me to the Restaurant Association's board of directors, who were looking for marketing partners who understood independent business challenges. David suggested connecting me with his network of small logistics companies that needed help competing against corporate shipping giants. Here's what I don't understand, Jennifer said finally. Why are we talking about this like Pinnacle is offering you something you can't build yourself? You've created more value for our businesses in 6 months than most agencies deliver in years. You're not trying to get into their world, you're building a better one. She was right, but the offer from Pinnacle represented something more complex than financial opportunity. It was validation from the establishment that had rejected me, acknowledgement that my work was valuable enough to command their respect and significant investment. It was also, I realized, a trap. Marcus wasn't offering me a job because he wanted to expand into community-focused marketing. He was offering me a job because Catalyst Creative was becoming a threat he needed to neutralize. If he could hire me back, he would control my client relationships, my creative output, and my growing reputation in the small business market. If I accepted his offer, I would be trading my independence for financial security and his approval. I would be returning to a world where my success was measured by his standards, where my creativity served his vision, where my family would always be people not worth mentioning compared to his social circle. But if I declined his offer, I would be declaring war on Pinnacle Creative and everything it represented. I would be betting my future on the belief that talent and authenticity could compete with connections and capital. I would be choosing the uncertainty of building something new over the security of returning to something familiar. That evening, I sat in my office as the sun set over Manhattan, looking at the financial projections Jennifer had left behind. Catalyst Creative was profitable and growing, but we were still small, still vulnerable, still dependent on word-of-mouth marketing and client loyalty rather than institutional relationships and established market position. Pinnacle's offer represented the easy path. Return to a salary that would pay off my student loans and support my family, work within a system that valued me enough to pay premium prices for my skills, let someone else handle business development and administrative challenges while I focused on creative work. But easy had never been the point. I opened my laptop and began typing a response to Brandon's offer. Not an acceptance or a rejection, but something more strategic, a counterproposal that would reveal exactly how serious Pinnacle was about working with me and how much they understood about what I'd built. The email was brief and professional. Brandon. Thank you for the generous offer and for thinking of me for this position. I'm flattered by Pinnacle's interest in expanding into community-focused marketing. However, rather than joining Pinnacle as an employee, I'd like to propose a partnership arrangement. Catalyst Creative could serve as Pinnacle's exclusive small business marketing partner, handling community-focused accounts while maintaining our independent operations and client relationships. This would allow both agencies to focus on our respective strengths while providing Pinnacle's corporate clients with access to authentic community marketing when needed. I'm happy to discuss the details if this approach interests you. I read the email 3 times before sending it, knowing that it would force Marcus to reveal his true intentions. If he genuinely wanted to expand into community marketing, a partnership with an established specialist would be ideal. If he was trying to eliminate a competitor, he would reject any arrangement that allowed me to maintain independence. The response came faster than I expected. Brandon called within an hour, his voice carrying a different tone than it had during our coffee meeting. Stella, I discussed your counterproposal with Marcus, and unfortunately, we're really looking for someone to lead this initiative internally. We need full integration with our existing client services and strategic planning processes. But the offer stands if you're interested in joining the team. Translation: they wanted control, not partnership. They wanted to eliminate Catalyst Creative, not collaborate with it. Marcus had revealed his hand, and it wasn't about expanding into new markets or valuing my expertise. It was about neutralizing a threat to his established order. I understand, I said. Thanks for clarifying Pinnacle's needs. I'll need to decline the offer, but I appreciate you thinking of me. Are you sure? This is a significant opportunity, Stella. The community marketing space is getting crowded, and having Pinnacle's resources behind you would provide advantages that independent agencies simply can't match. The community marketing space was getting crowded. Interesting. That suggested other agencies were also recognizing the opportunity I'd identified, which meant the window for establishing market leadership was closing. It also suggested that Marcus was feeling pressure from multiple directions, not just from Catalyst Creative. I'm sure, I said. But thank you again for the offer. After hanging up, I called Sophia and told her about the conversation. So what's next? She asked. Next, we stop hiding, I said. It's time to show Manhattan's advertising establishment what Queens has been building while they weren't paying attention. The war Marcus had been avoiding was about to begin. Whether he was ready for it or not, the invitation arrived on a Monday morning in July, delivered by courier to Catalyst Creative's office with the kind of formal presentation that announced its importance before you even opened the envelope. Thick paper, embossed letterhead, gold seal. The New York Advertising Excellence Awards Committee was hosting their annual Pitch Perfect competition, and they wanted Catalyst Creative to participate. Pitch Perfect was an industry legend, a live competition where agencies presented campaigns for real clients in front of an audience of potential customers, industry leaders, and media representatives. Winners gained immediate credibility and access to New York's most exclusive client networks. Losers faced public humiliation and industry ridicule that could destroy agencies overnight. The format was brutal: 3 agencies, 1 client, 36 hours to develop and present a complete campaign strategy. This year's client was Metrotech Solutions, a mid-sized technology services company looking to expand from corporate IT support into consumer electronics retail. They needed a campaign that could launch their new consumer division while maintaining their established B2B relationships. The other 2 agencies invited to compete were Madison Parker Associates, a prestigious firm that handled luxury brands and Fortune 500 accounts, and Pinnacle Creative. Marcus had maneuvered this. Somehow, someway, he had engineered a public competition between his agency and mine, with industry witnesses and real stakes. It was exactly the kind of power play he specialized in, creating situations where his advantages, connections, resources, establishment credibility, would overwhelm any opponent's talent or innovation. But he had made one crucial miscalculation. He still thought of me as the employee he dismissed, the girl from Queens who should be grateful for his attention. He had no idea what Catalyst Creative had become or how thoroughly I'd studied his methods while building something designed specifically to outperform them. The competition would be held at the Javits Center, with presentations live-streamed to industry professionals nationwide. Each agency would have access to the same research materials, the same client briefings, the same presentation equipment. The only variables would be strategy, creativity, and execution under pressure. I accepted the invitation immediately. The next 2 weeks became a masterclass in strategic preparation. While Marcus was probably assuming I'd approach this like a traditional advertising competition, researching demographics, developing focus group data, creating polished presentations designed to impress industry judges, I was doing something completely different. I was getting to know Metrotech Solutions as if they were family. I spent 3 days at their corporate headquarters in White Plains, not in conference rooms with executives, but on the floor with their actual technicians and customer service representatives. I watched how they diagnosed problems, listened to how they talked about technology, observed how they interacted with frustrated customers who needed solutions, not sales pitches. Metrotech's corporate culture was fascinating, engineer-driven, problem-solving focused, genuinely committed to making technology work better for people who weren't technology experts. Their B2B success came from being the company other companies called when their systems failed and they needed someone who could fix problems rather than just sell products, but their consumer division was struggling because they were trying to compete in retail electronics by copying the strategies of companies like Best Buy and Apple, companies that sold aspirational technology to people who wanted the latest gadgets. Metrotech's DNA was completely different. They were fixers, not sellers. They were relationship builders, not transaction processors. The insight hit me during a conversation with Linda Martinez, a customer service representative who had been with Metrotech for 8 years. She was explaining how she helped small business owners choose the right technology solutions for their specific needs, walking them through options without pushing them toward expensive upgrades they didn't need. "We're not trying to sell them the newest thing," Linda said. "We're trying to solve their actual problems. Sometimes that means recommending something cheaper than what they thought they wanted." That was Metrotech's secret weapon, and it was exactly what their consumer division had been ignoring. Instead of trying to become another electronics retailer competing on price and selection, they should position themselves as the technology problem solvers for people who needed electronics to work, not to impress. The revelation restructured everything about how I would approach the competition. While Madison Parker and Pinnacle would probably present variations on traditional retail marketing, sleek advertisements showcasing product features, promotional pricing strategies, lifestyle imagery connecting products to aspirational identity, I would present something revolutionary, a campaign that made buying electronics feel like getting professional consultation rather than navigating a sales process. I spent the next week developing what I privately called the technology translation strategy. Instead of selling products, Metrotech's consumer division would sell solutions. Instead of competing with electronics superstores, they would create a new category, technology consultation for real people with real problems. The campaign concept was elegant in its simplicity, tech that works for life. Every advertisement would feature real customers explaining real technology challenges, the grandmother trying to video call her grandchildren, the small business owner needing a reliable point-of-sale system, the college student looking for a laptop that would last for years without breaking the bank, and Metrotech technicians providing clear, honest guidance. No jargon. No pressure. No assumptions about what people should want. Just skilled professionals helping regular people find technology solutions that improve their lives instead of complicating them. The week before the competition, I received unexpected intelligence from Sophia, whose restaurant association connections had grown into an informal network of small business owners throughout the city. One of her contacts, who provided catering services for corporate events, had overheard conversations at a Pinnacle creative planning session. "They're going after Metrotech's B2B relationships," Sophia reported during a quick coffee meeting. Something about positioning the consumer division as a natural extension of their corporate services, targeting the same decision-makers for personal purchases. It was exactly the kind of strategy Marcus would develop, logical, safe, designed to impress judges who valued strategic thinking over creative innovation. He would present Metrotech's consumer division as a premium service for the same corporate executives who already trusted their B2B solutions. The approach had obvious appeal, leveraging existing relationships, maintaining brand consistency, targeting customers with proven purchasing power. It was the kind of campaign that looked brilliant in PowerPoint presentations and satisfied clients who wanted to minimize risk. It was also completely wrong for Metrotech's actual strengths and market opportunity. The night before the competition, I sat in my office reviewing final preparations. My presentation was ready, my strategy was clear, my team was prepared. But I was also terrified, because this wasn't just about winning a competition or gaining industry recognition. This was about proving that everything I'd built over the past 8 months could compete with everything Marcus represented. If Catalyst Creative lost tomorrow, it wouldn't just be a business setback. It would be validation of every dismissive comment Marcus had ever made about my place in the advertising hierarchy. It would prove that talent without connections, authenticity without establishment backing, innovation without institutional resources, wasn't enough to compete at the highest levels, but if we won, if we could demonstrate that understanding real people's real problems produced better results than networking and pedigree and inherited advantages, then everything would change. Not just for Catalyst Creative, but for every overlooked employee, every dismissed idea, every small business that had been told they weren't worth the attention of serious agencies. The stakes were personal, professional, and symbolic. Tomorrow would determine whether the girl from Queens whose family wasn't worth mentioning could rewrite the rules of Manhattan's advertising establishment. Competition day arrived with the kind of crystalline July weather that makes New York feel like the center of the universe. The Javits Center was buzzing with industry professionals, media representatives, and curious observers who had come to witness what the trade publications were calling the year's most anticipated agency showdown. I arrived early, wanting to familiarize myself with the presentation space and settle my nerves before the formal proceedings began. The setup was designed for maximum drama: 3 identical presentation areas, each equipped with large screens, wireless microphones, and seating for the Metrotech executive team who would serve as final judges. Madison Parker Associates had sent a team of 6, led by Catherine Parker herself, a legendary creative director whose campaigns had defined luxury marketing for 2 decades. They moved with the choreographed precision of people who had won dozens of similar competitions, setting up materials with the confidence of established champions. Pinnacle Creative's team was smaller but equally polished. Marcus had brought Brandon and Samantha, along with 2 junior associates whose jobs seemed to be carrying materials and projecting youthful energy. Marcus himself looked exactly as he always did, expensively dressed, carefully groomed, radiating the kind of natural authority that came from never having to prove he belonged in important rooms. When he saw me across the presentation area, his expression shifted almost imperceptibly: surprise, calculation, something that might have been respect mixed with concern. He nodded politely, the kind of acknowledgement you give to worthy opponents rather than dismissed employees. The format was straightforward: each agency would have 90 minutes to present their complete campaign strategy to the Metrotech team and a panel of industry judges. Presentations would be live-streamed, with real-time feedback from viewers adding an additional layer of pressure and opportunity. Madison Parker presented first, delivering exactly the kind of sophisticated campaign you'd expect from luxury brand specialists. Their strategy positioned Metrotech's consumer division as technology concierge services for discerning customers, complete with flagship stores designed like high-end boutiques and marketing that emphasized exclusivity and premium service. The presentation was flawless: polished graphics, compelling market research, detailed implementation timelines. Catherine Parker commanded the room with the authority of someone who had built her reputation on understanding what wealthy customers wanted and delivering it with style. But watching the Metrotech executives' faces, I could see the disconnect. These were engineers and problem solvers who had built their company by being accessible and practical. Madison Parker's vision would transform them into something aspirational and exclusive, successful, perhaps, but fundamentally different from what they were. Pinnacle Creative presented second, and Marcus delivered exactly the campaign Sophia's intelligence had predicted. His strategy leveraged Metrotech's B2B relationships, positioning their consumer division as a natural extension of corporate services for the same executive decision-makers. Trust transfers, Marcus explained, clicking through slides that showed Metrotech's corporate clients receiving premium technology consultation for their personal purchases. When executives trust us with their company's technology infrastructure, they're ready to trust us with their family's technology needs. The logic was impeccable, the market research was thorough, the implementation plan was detailed and realistic. Marcus presented with the smooth confidence of someone who understood that winning agency competitions was about demonstrating strategic thinking and risk management rather than creative innovation. It was a good campaign. Safe, logical, profitable. Exactly the kind of approach that had built Marcus's reputation and secured Pinnacle's position in Manhattan's advertising hierarchy, but it was also predictable, uninspiring, and completely missed Metrotech's real opportunity in the consumer market. When my turn came, I walked to the presentation area feeling the weight of 8 months of preparation, years of accumulated frustration, and the hopes of every small business owner who had trusted Catalyst Creative with their dreams. Metrotech Solutions, I began, has spent 15 years becoming the company other companies call when their technology breaks down and they need someone who can actually fix it. That's not just a business model, it's a superpower that no one else in consumer electronics can match. I clicked to my first slide, a photograph of Linda Martinez helping a small business owner choose a point-of-sale system, both of them smiling with the satisfaction of finding the right solution. While other electronics retailers are trying to sell customers the newest, most expensive technology, MetroTech can offer something revolutionary, technology that actually works for real people's real lives. The next 90 minutes transformed the competition into something none of us had expected. Instead of presenting marketing strategies, I was presenting a new way of thinking about what technology retail could become. Instead of competing for market share in existing categories, I was demonstrating how MetroTech could create an entirely new category. Tech that works for life wasn't just a campaign slogan, it was a business philosophy that could differentiate MetroTech from every other electronics retailer by focusing on the one thing their competitors couldn't provide: genuine expertise. Applied to individual customer needs, the presentation included prototype store layouts designed like consultation centers rather than showrooms, staffed by technicians trained to solve problems rather than close sales. Marketing materials featured real customers explaining how MetroTech had helped them find technology solutions that improved their lives. Training programs would teach staff to ask, "What do you need this to do?" instead of, "What's your budget?" By the time I finished, the room was completely silent. The MetroTech executives were leaning forward, engaged in a way they hadn't been during the previous presentations. The industry judges were taking notes, exchanging glances that suggested they were witnessing something unexpected. Marcus was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before, the look of someone who had just realized he'd fundamentally misjudged his opposition. The judges deliberated for 30 minutes that felt like 30 hours. When they returned, Sarah Chen, MetroTech's CEO, stood to deliver the verdict. All three presentations demonstrated exceptional strategic thinking and creative execution, she began. Madison Parker Associates showed us how to position technology as luxury service. Pinnacle Creative showed us how to leverage our existing relationships for market expansion. She paused, looking directly at me. But Catalyst Creative showed us how to become the company we always wanted to be. Your campaign doesn't just market our consumer division, it transforms how we think about serving customers. It's not just brilliant marketing, it's a blueprint for building the kind of business we're proud to lead. She smiled. Catalyst Creative wins. The room erupted in applause, but I barely heard it. I was looking at Marcus, watching him process what had just happened. The girl from Queens whose family wasn't worth mentioning had just defeated his established agency in front of the entire New York advertising industry, and this was only the beginning. The industry reception following the pitch-perfect announcement was unlike anything I'd experienced in my advertising career. Within minutes of Sarah Chen's verdict, my phone was buzzing with text messages, LinkedIn notifications, and voice calls from numbers I didn't recognize. The live stream had reached over 12,000 viewers, and social media was exploding with commentary from agencies, clients, and marketing professionals who had witnessed what trade publications were already calling the upset of the year. But the most satisfying moment came as the crowd began to disperse. Marcus approached me with measured steps, his usual confident stride replaced by something more cautious. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked uncertain about how to navigate a social interaction. "Congratulations, Stella," he said, extending his hand. "That was impressive work. Really impressive." I shook his hand, studying his face for signs of the condescension that had colored every previous interaction we'd had. Instead, I saw something I'd never expected: genuine recognition of what had just happened. Not just that I'd won a competition, but that I'd demonstrated a level of strategic thinking and creative execution that demanded respect. "Thank you, Marcus. That means a lot coming from you." He nodded slowly, as if processing implications that extended far beyond this single competition. "I have to ask, how long have you been developing this approach? The community-focused strategy, the authentic storytelling framework. It's clearly not something you put together for this presentation." The question revealed more than he probably intended. Marcus was trying to understand when I'd stopped being his employee and started becoming his competitor. He was calculating how long I'd been building something that could challenge everything he'd assumed about market positioning and competitive advantage. "I've been thinking about it for a while," I said. "Sometimes the best ideas come from understanding what people actually need instead of what we think they should want." Brandon and Samantha had joined us, their expressions carefully neutral but their body language suggesting they were witnessing a conversation with significant implications for Pinnacle's future. Other industry professionals lingered nearby, clearly hoping to overhear whatever Marcus Thornfield and the night's surprise winner were discussing. "Well," Marcus said finally, "you've certainly given us all something to think about. I suspect this won't be the last time we're competing for the same clients." It was acknowledgement, threat, and grudging respect all wrapped into one carefully constructed sentence. Marcus was officially recognizing me as a competitor worthy of his attention, while simultaneously putting me on notice that he wouldn't underestimate me again. As he walked away, followed by his team and a cluster of industry contacts eager to discuss what had just happened, I realized that everything was about to change. Not just for Catalyst Creative, but for my entire relationship with New York's advertising establishment. The first concrete evidence came before I'd even left the Javits Center. Catherine Parker, whose Madison Parker Associates had delivered a flawless but ultimately unsuccessful presentation, approached me during the networking reception that traditionally followed pitch-perfect competitions. "Stella Rodriguez," she said, offering her hand with the warm smile of someone who genuinely appreciated excellent work regardless of who produced it. "I've been in this business for 25 years, and I've never seen a presentation that completely reframed a client's understanding of their own market opportunity. That was masterful." Coming from Catherine Parker, the compliment carried significant weight. She was advertising royalty, someone whose approval could legitimize agencies and whose criticism could destroy reputations. More importantly, she had no political reason to flatter me. We weren't competing for the same clients or operating in the same market segments. "I appreciate that, Catherine. Your luxury positioning strategy was brilliant. In a different context, it would have been the obvious winner. Perhaps. But you did something more valuable than winning a competition. You demonstrated that understanding. Authentic human needs produces better results than following established playbooks." She paused, studying my face with the intensity of someone evaluating a potential investment. "Have you given any thought to scaling this approach? Because there are clients, significant clients, who need exactly what you just demonstrated." Before I could respond, we were interrupted by Tom Washington, a senior account director from Fletcher & Associates, one of Manhattan's most respected mid-sized agencies. He was followed by Maria Santos from Brooklyn Community Bank, who had apparently been watching the live stream and driven into Manhattan to congratulate me in person. The next hour became a blur of introductions, business card exchanges, and preliminary discussions about potential collaborations. Representatives from 6 different agencies expressed interest in partnership arrangements. For potential clients requested meetings to discuss campaigns for their own businesses. 2 journalists asked for interviews about Catalyst Creative's approach to community-focused marketing. Most significantly, I received a formal invitation to present at the American Marketing Association's annual conference in Chicago, where industry leaders gathered to discuss emerging trends and innovative strategies. The speaking fee alone would cover Catalyst Creative's operating expenses for 3 months, but the conversation that mattered most happened as the reception was winding down. Sarah Chen from Metrotech approached me with a kind of focused intensity that suggested she had something important to discuss. "Stella, I hope you don't mind me being direct, but I need to understand what we're actually getting ourselves into here. That presentation was unlike anything we've seen from agencies 3 times your size. Can you actually deliver what you just promised?" It was the question every startup founder dreads and every experienced executive needs to ask. Could Catalyst Creative, with its small team and limited resources, actually implement the sophisticated campaign strategy I just presented to one of New York's most demanding client audiences? "Yes," I said, meeting her gaze directly. "But not alone. This campaign will require partnerships with specialists in retail design, technology training, customer experience development, and digital implementation. I can coordinate all of that, but I'll need to build a temporary team specifically for this project." Sarah nodded approvingly. "That's exactly what I wanted to hear. Most agencies would have promised to handle everything internally, even if they didn't have the expertise. The fact that you're being honest about what you need tells me you understand the complexity of what we're trying to accomplish." She handed me a contract folder. "Standard terms, but accelerated timeline. We want to launch the consumer division pilot program in 3 months, which means we need campaign development to begin immediately. Can you have your project team assembled by next week?" I opened the folder and scanned the contract terms. The numbers were larger than anything Catalyst Creative had handled before, not just in terms of fees, but in terms of scope, timeline, and client expectations. Success would establish us as a legitimate player in New York's advertising market. Failure would be equally public and potentially devastating. "Yes," I said. "We can start Monday." The drive back to Queens gave me time to process what had just happened and begin planning what came next. The Metrotech contract would require me to operate at a completely different scale than anything I'd attempted before. I would need to hire additional staff, secure larger office space, establish relationships with specialist contractors, and manage a campaign budget that exceeded Catalyst Creative's entire previous revenue. More challenging than the operational requirements was the symbolic significance of what I'd just committed to doing. I wasn't just taking on a larger client, I was accepting a public test of whether my approach to advertising could compete with established agencies when resources, timelines, and expectations were equivalent. Marcus would be watching. The entire industry would be watching. And if I failed, it wouldn't just be a business setback, it would be validation of every assumption about why small agencies couldn't compete with established players, why talent without connections wasn't sufficient, why the girl from Queens should have been grateful for the opportunity to return to Pinnacle Creative when she'd had the chance. But I wasn't thinking about failure as I parked outside my office above Uncle Roberto's garage. I was thinking about the look on Marcus's face when he'd shaken my hand, the surprise in his voice when he'd acknowledged my work, the careful way he'd chosen his words when warning me that we'd be competing again. For 8 months, I'd been building something in the shadows, testing ideas with small clients, developing strategies that challenged conventional wisdom about how advertising agencies should operate. Tonight, I'd proven that those ideas could compete with establishment approaches when the stakes were highest and the audience was largest. Now I had to prove I could scale them. The next morning brought a flood of media attention that transformed Catalyst Creative from industry secret to industry story overnight. The trade publications had picked up the pitch-perfect results, but they were focusing on more than just the competition outcome. They were examining what my victory represented: a small, community-focused agency defeating established competitors by fundamentally rethinking how marketing should work. Advertising Age ran a feature titled, "The Queen's Gambit: How Authentic Storytelling Beat Establishment Strategy." Adweek published an analysis called Catalyst Creative and the New Rules of Agency Competition. Campaign magazine requested an interview about community-focused marketing as industry disruption. Each article brought new attention, new inquiries, and new pressure. By noon, I had received 7 requests for client meetings, 3 job offers from established agencies, and one particularly interesting call from a venture capital firm that specialized in marketing technology investments. But the most important call came from someone whose opinion mattered more than any industry publication or potential investor. Mia. My mother's voice carried pride, excitement, and something that sounded like awe. "I just got off the phone with your Aunt Rosa. She saw an article about you online. Something about beating the big companies and helping small businesses tell their stories. Is this really happening?" I realized I hadn't spoken to my family about the competition, hadn't shared the magnitude of what I'd been building or what winning might mean for Catalyst Creative's future. In my focus on industry recognition and business development, I'd forgotten the most important audience for my success. "It's really happening, Mom. Remember when I told you I was learning who I wanted to become? I think I'm finally figuring it out. Tell me everything," she said. I spent 30 minutes describing the competition, the campaign strategy, the client meetings, and the media attention. But more importantly, I told her about the small business owners who had trusted me with their dreams, about the campaigns that had transformed restaurants and hardware stores and shipping companies into community institutions, about the discovery that the most powerful marketing came from understanding real people's real lives. "You know what I'm proudest of," she said when I finished. "Not that you won some big competition, though that's wonderful. I'm proud that you remembered where you came from while you were building something new. Your grandmother always said, the best way to honor your family is to help other families succeed." After we hung up, I sat in my office looking out at the Manhattan skyline and thinking about what my grandmother would say if she could see what I'd built. She'd crossed a border with nothing but hope and raised children who became teachers, nurses, small business owners, and now, apparently, advertising executives who could compete with Manhattan's establishment on their own terms. The afternoon brought the first concrete challenge of scaling up. I had scheduled meetings with 3 potential team members: Jessica Liu, a retail design specialist who had worked with Apple before starting her own consultancy; Michael Thompson, a customer experience developer whose work with small businesses had caught my attention; and Patricia Rodriguez, no relation, despite the shared surname, a digital marketing strategist who understood how to implement sophisticated campaigns on realistic budgets. Each conversation revealed both the opportunities and challenges of rapid growth. All 3 were excited about the MetroTech project and impressed by Catalyst Creative's community-focused approach. But they also asked detailed questions about project management, resource allocation, and long-term business strategy that forced me to articulate plans I'd only begun to develop. "The biggest risk," Jessica said during our meeting at a coffee shop near her Brooklyn studio, "isn't whether we can deliver excellent work for MetroTech. Based on your track record and the strategy you've outlined, I'm confident we can exceed their expectations. The risk is whether you're prepared for what success at this level means." She was right. Success with MetroTech would establish Catalyst Creative as a legitimate alternative to established agencies, which would bring opportunities, competitors, and expectations that I'd never had to manage before. I would need to decide whether I wanted to build a small, specialized agency that served community-focused clients, or a larger operation that could compete across multiple market segments. More importantly, I would need to decide how much of Marcus Thornfield's world I was willing to enter in order to compete with it. The day ended with one final surprise: an email from Brandon Mitchell, sent to my personal account rather than through official Pinnacle channels. Stella, I know things are complicated between our agencies right now, but I wanted to reach out personally to congratulate you on today's win. That was genuinely impressive work, and I think you're going to change how this industry thinks about client relationships. I also wanted to apologize for how things went when you were at Pinnacle. You deserved better than what you received, and your success now proves that our loss was your gain. I hope we can find ways to collaborate rather than just compete. The industry needs more of what you're building. Brandon, it was unexpected, gracious, and strategically interesting. Brandon was positioning himself as a potential ally rather than an opponent, which suggested that not everyone at Pinnacle viewed Catalyst Creative's success as a threat to be eliminated, but it also suggested that Marcus's response to today's events might be more complex than simple competition. If his own team was reaching out to establish relationships with me, it meant Pinnacle was reconsidering their entire approach to the changing market dynamics I represented. The war was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. But for the first time since Christmas Eve, when Marcus had dismissed my family as not worth mentioning, I felt like I was fighting from a position of strength rather than just surviving someone else's attack. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and new tests of whether the girl from Queens could continue building something that competed with Manhattan's establishment on her own terms. But tonight, I was going to celebrate. Because sometimes, just sometimes, talent and authenticity and pure determination are enough to rewrite the rules everyone said could never be changed. 6 months after the pitch-perfect victory, I stood in the conference room of Catalyst Creative's new headquarters in Long Island City, watching through floor-to-ceiling windows as the first MetroTech technology translation store prepared for its grand opening across the street. The space looked nothing like a traditional electronics retailer: no overwhelming walls of products, no pressure-filled sales floors, no confusing technical displays that alienated regular customers. Instead, MetroTech had created something revolutionary: a consultation center where customers sat comfortably with technology specialists who asked about their actual needs before suggesting solutions. Interactive stations let people test how different devices would work in their real lives. A family tech section helped parents find age-appropriate technology for their children. The Small Business Solutions area provided entrepreneurs with practical advice about systems that would grow with their companies. The grand opening had attracted lines around the block, not because of promotional pricing or flashy marketing, but because word had spread through the community that this was a place where you could get honest advice about technology purchases from people who genuinely wanted to help rather than just sell. Sarah Chen stood beside me, reviewing the customer feedback data that had been streaming in since the pilot program launched 3 months earlier. The numbers told a story that exceeded everyone's expectations: 94% customer satisfaction, 67% higher average transaction values than traditional electronics stores, and most remarkably, an 89% customer return rate for additional purchases and consultations. "We're opening 4 more locations before Christmas," Sarah said, her voice carrying the satisfaction of someone whose biggest gamble had paid off beyond all projections. "Boston, Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., and Atlanta. The model works because it's built on something our competitors can't copy: genuine expertise applied to individual customer needs." The MetroTech success had transformed everything about Catalyst Creative's position in the industry. We'd proven that community-focused marketing wasn't just effective for small businesses, it could revolutionize how major companies approached customer relationships across any market segment. But the real transformation went deeper than client success or industry recognition. The girl from Queens who had been dismissed as just a filthy mechanic of marketing had built something that challenged fundamental assumptions about how business should work, who deserved opportunities, and what happened when talent met authentic purpose. The phone call that confirmed everything had changed came on a Tuesday morning in December, exactly 1 year after Marcus had forced me to work Christmas while dismissing my family as not worth mentioning. The caller was Jennifer Walsh from Brooklyn Community Bank, but she was calling with news that had nothing to do with our ongoing campaign work. "Stella, I thought you should hear this directly from me," Jennifer said, her voice carrying a mixture of professional satisfaction and personal vindication. "Pinnacle Creative just approached us about taking over their banking relationship. Apparently, they're having some financial difficulties and need a bank that specializes in working with struggling businesses." The irony was so perfect it almost felt scripted. Marcus Thornfield, who had built his agency's reputation by stealing credit for my work and dismissing employees who didn't fit his social circle, was now seeking help from the community bank I'd helped position as an alternative to corporate financial institutions. "What did you tell them?" I asked. "I told them we'd be happy to help, just like we help all small businesses that need support during challenging times," Jennifer replied. "But I also mentioned that they might want to consult with our marketing partner about strategies for rebuilding their client relationships. I gave Marcus your number. He never called." Instead, I learned about Pinnacle's situation through the industry publications that had once treated Marcus as advertising royalty. The story emerged gradually: major clients leaving for agencies that offered more innovative strategies, junior staff departing for companies that valued creativity over connections, and overhead costs that had been manageable when premium fees were flowing in becoming unsustainable as revenue declined. The proximate cause was clear: Marcus had built Pinnacle's reputation on work I'd created, and without me generating breakthrough campaigns, the agency had devolved into an expensive provider of safe, predictable marketing that clients could get cheaper elsewhere. But the deeper issue was structural. Marcus had never understood that sustainable success in advertising required continuous innovation, authentic client relationships, and respect for talent regardless of its pedigree. He'd assumed that connections and social positioning could substitute for creative excellence indefinitely. He'd been wrong. The final confirmation came through a conversation with Brandon Mitchell, who had maintained periodic contact despite the complicated dynamics between our agencies. We met for coffee at the same Midtown cafe where he'd originally offered me the job that I declined to accept. "Marcus is selling," Brandon said without preamble. "Madison Parker Associates made an offer for Pinnacle's client list and intellectual property. He's keeping it quiet, but the deal should close before the end of the year." Pinnacle Creative, the agency that had once seemed like the pinnacle of Manhattan advertising success, was being absorbed by a competitor because it could no longer compete independently. "What about you?" I asked. "What's next for Brandon Mitchell?" He smiled with the kind of self-awareness that suggested he'd learned something important during the past year. "Actually, I was hoping we could discuss that. I've been thinking about what you said regarding authentic client relationships and community-focused marketing. There's a market opportunity for agencies that understand how to serve mid-sized companies that want sophisticated strategy without Manhattan overhead and pretension." It was a job interview disguised as a casual conversation, and we both knew it. Brandon was asking if Catalyst Creative had room for someone with his background and connections, someone who could help us scale more quickly into markets we hadn't yet penetrated. The request required careful consideration. Brandon represented everything about the advertising establishment that I'd built Catalyst Creative to challenge: privilege, connections, inherited advantages. But he also brought genuine strategic skills, established client relationships, and an understanding of corporate culture that could help us compete more effectively for larger accounts. More importantly, he was acknowledging that my approach to advertising was more effective than the traditional methods he'd been trained to use. His request to join Catalyst Creative was an admission that talent and authenticity could outperform pedigree and networking when clients needed real results. "We're expanding into Philadelphia and Boston," I said finally. "If you're serious about learning how to do marketing that actually serves client needs instead of just agency egos, we can discuss possibilities." 6 weeks later, Brandon Mitchell became Catalyst Creative's Director of Strategic Partnerships, leading our expansion into markets where corporate clients needed sophisticated marketing but wanted to work with agencies that understood their actual business challenges rather than just their budgets. His first campaign was for a Philadelphia manufacturing company that needed help attracting younger workers to traditionally blue-collar jobs. Instead of trying to make factory work look glamorous, Brandon developed a strategy that highlighted the skill, precision, and innovation required for modern manufacturing. The Masters of Making campaign attracted national attention for demonstrating how traditional industries could compete for talent by emphasizing authentic value rather than superficial appeal. It was exactly the kind of work Marcus had never allowed Brandon to pursue at Pinnacle Creative: challenging, focused on solving real problems rather than just impressing industry judges. The Christmas season brought a different kind of celebration than I'd experienced in years. Instead of working alone in an empty office, I was hosting Catalyst Creative's first annual holiday party in our Long Island City headquarters. The guest list included current clients, team members, and the extended network of small business owners who had become not just customers, but collaborators in building a different kind of agency. Sophia arrived with her entire family, bringing enough dim sum to feed twice our number of guests. David brought his latest shipping innovations to show off, along with stories about the corporate clients who had started asking if their logistics provider could teach them about authentic customer service. Maria's custom cakes had become the centerpiece of every celebration, and her business had expanded to include 3 locations across Queens and Brooklyn. But the most meaningful moment came when my mother arrived, accompanied by my Aunt Rosa, my cousin Miguel, and his children. They toured the office with the kind of pride that made me remember why I'd started this journey in the first place. "Look at this," my mother said, standing in front of the wall where we displayed client success stories. "All these families, all these businesses, all these dreams you helped make real. This is what work should look like." She was right. This was what work should look like: talented people using their skills to help other people succeed, building something sustainable and meaningful rather than just profitable, creating value for communities rather than just extracting it. As the evening wound down, I found myself standing alone in my office, looking out at the Manhattan skyline where Marcus Thornfield had once built his empire on borrowed talent and inherited advantages. The lights of the city stretched endlessly in all directions, representing millions of people with dreams, problems, stories worth telling, businesses worth building. Somewhere in that landscape, Marcus was probably finishing the paperwork that would transfer Pinnacle Creative's assets to Madison Parker Associates. Somewhere else, former Pinnacle employees were learning that talent without connections could build something more sustainable than connections without talent. And here in Queens, in an office above my uncle's garage, expanded into a real headquarters. But still rooted in the community that had taught me what authentic success looked like, I was building something that proved a simple but revolutionary idea: when you help other people succeed, you create something more valuable than money or recognition or revenge, you create legacy. The final piece of the story came through an unexpected source. 3 days before Christmas, I received a handwritten letter delivered by regular mail to Catalyst Creative's office. The return address showed a post office box in the Hamptons, and the handwriting was unmistakably Marcus's careful script. The letter was brief: "Stella, I've been thinking about our last conversation at the Javits Center, and I realize there are things I should have said then that I didn't. You were right about authentic marketing, about understanding real customer needs, about building something that serves communities rather than just extracting profit from them. I was wrong about many things, but I was especially wrong about you. Your family, your background, your perspective, these weren't limitations to overcome. They were advantages I was too proud and narrow-minded to recognize. You built something I never could have imagined, let alone created." The girl from Queens whose family I dismissed as not worth mentioning became everything I thought I was but never actually achieved: a leader who earned respect through excellence rather than inheritance. I don't expect forgiveness, and I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know that I finally understand what I lost when I chose privilege over talent, connections over creativity, comfort over courage. Congratulations on building something beautiful, Marcus." I read the letter 3 times, then folded it carefully and put it in the desk drawer where I kept other important documents. Not because I needed his validation, that need had disappeared somewhere between the pitch-perfect victory and the Metrotech grand opening, but because it represented something larger than personal vindication. Marcus Thornfield's letter was an acknowledgement that the old rules were changing, that talent and authenticity and genuine service were competing successfully with inherited advantages and social positioning. It was confirmation that the revolution I'd started in a small office above a garage in Queens was spreading throughout an industry that had resisted change for decades. But most importantly, it was proof that sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying your enemies, it's building something so much better than what they created that they have no choice but to recognize its superiority. On Christmas Eve, exactly 1 year after Marcus had forced me to work while others celebrated, I sat around my mother's dining table surrounded by the family he dismissed as not worth mentioning. We shared stories about the year's successes, made plans for future dreams, and celebrated the kind of achievements that matter most: helping other people, building something meaningful, staying true to the values that had shaped us long before we understood what success could look like. Outside, snow was beginning to fall on Queens, covering the neighborhood where I'd learned that the most powerful marketing tool was genuine human connection, where I'd discovered that authentic stories don't just sell products, they create movements, where I'd built something that proved talent without connections could rewrite the rules everyone said could never be changed. The girl from Queens whose family wasn't worth mentioning had become a woman whose work was worth emulating, whose agency was worth joining, whose story was worth telling. And every time someone asked how Catalyst Creative had grown from a secret evening project into an industry leader, I gave them the same answer: we listened to real people, solved real problems, and never forgot that business success means nothing if it doesn't help families succeed too. That was the legacy Marcus had never understood and could never build: success that lifted others rather than standing on their shoulders, achievement that created opportunities rather than hoarding them, power that served communities rather than exploiting them. It was the legacy of a girl who had tuned her pain into performance, and in doing so, had shown everyone who doubted her exactly what happens when you underestimate someone whose family raised her to believe that respect is earned. Dreams are built through work, and the best way to honor where you came from is to help others get where they're going. The revolution was complete. The future belonged to anyone willing to build it. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.